You think you know betrayal? I did too. Until Dr. Peterson, a man who'd seen more death than a battlefield medic, slipped a note into my jacket pocket during my annual physical. One line, scrawled with a trembling hand, "Your daughter is trying to kill you." I dismissed it as paranoia. That was my first mistake. My second would have been my last. The sterile tang of the examining room at Peterson's office in North Salem usually brought a strange comfort. A familiar ritual, a reminder that even at 72, the old machine was still humming, albeit with a few more creaks and groans. I've known Dave Peterson since we were kids, running wild through the woods of Westchester, stealing apples from Old Man Henderson's orchard. He's seen me through broken bones, a nasty divorce, and the quiet, crushing grief of losing my wife, Eleanor. He knows me better than anyone, probably even better than I know myself sometimes. So he shook my hand, his grip surprisingly weak, and pressed that folded scrap of paper into my palm. I felt a jolt. Not fear, not yet. Just a cold, sharp curiosity. "Frank," he'd said, his eyes darting to the door, then back to mine, a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. Urgency? Fear? Dancing in their depths. "Everything looks fine. Keep up the walking. We'll see you next year." His voice was flat, almost rehearsed, completely devoid of his usual good-natured banter. His gaze lingered for a second too long, a silent plea that I instantly recognized but couldn't decipher. I nodded, muttered my thanks, and walked out into the crisp autumn air. The note was a foreign object in my pocket, a tiny, unsettling weight. I slid into my old Ford F-150, the familiar rumble of the engine a small comfort against the growing unease. What was that all about? Dave Peterson wasn't a man given to dramatics. He was a rock, steady and unwavering. For him to act like that, it was significant. I pulled out of the parking lot. The vibrant foliage of upstate New York a stark contrast to the drab gray of the doctor's office. I drove slowly, my mind replaying the scene. Dave's trembling hand, the hurried whisper, the way his eyes had seemed to beg me to understand something he couldn't articulate. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. I finally pulled the note out at a stoplight, my fingers fumbling slightly. It was a prescription pad slip, torn haphazardly. The scrawl was indeed Dave's, but it looked like he'd written it in a hurry, perhaps even under duress. And then I read it. "Your daughter is trying to kill you." The words hit me like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that stole my breath. Sarah? My Sarah? The bright, ambitious woman who lit up every room she entered? The architect who just landed a prestigious project in the city, making me swell with pride? My only child, the last piece of Eleanor I had left? It was absurd. Beyond absurd. It was a sick joke. I crumpled the note, my first instinct to dismiss it, to laugh it off as some bizarre delusion of an aging doctor. Maybe Dave was losing it. Maybe the pressure of his practice, the relentless march of time, was finally getting to him. But the image of his face, etched with genuine, unadulterated fear, wouldn't leave me. It burrowed deep, a cold seed of doubt in the fertile ground of my old man's cynicism. I got home, the usual quiet of my house in Cadena feeling heavier than usual. I live alone now, a widower for almost 8 years. My days are structured around my contracting business, my morning coffee ritual, and the occasional phone call with Sarah, who lives in a sleek condo in Manhattan. Our relationship was good, or so I thought. She visited for holidays, called on my birthday. We didn't have profound philosophical debates, but we shared a bond, a history. She was my daughter, my blood. I poured myself a scotch, the amber liquid swirling in the glass, mirroring the chaos in my mind. I smoothed out the crumpled note on the kitchen counter, rereading the words. "Your daughter is trying to kill you." It was a bold statement, one that demanded more than a casual dismissal. I sat there, the twilight deepening outside, casting long, eerie shadows across the familiar room. I tried to find any flicker, any hint in Sarah's recent behavior that could possibly support such a monstrous accusation. Nothing. Just the usual updates about her career, her new boyfriend, Mark, a charming but somewhat slick investment banker she'd been seeing for a year. He seemed a little too eager to please, a little too perfect, but then, I was an old man, prone to suspicion. No, it had to be a mistake. A terrible, tragic misunderstanding. Dave was wrong. He had to be. Then my phone buzzed. It was Sarah. "Hey, Dad." Her voice, bright and cheerful, sliced through the growing gloom. "Just calling to check in. How was your checkup with Dr. Peterson? Everything all right?" A cold dread trickled down my spine. How did she know? I hadn't mentioned the appointment to her. It was a routine thing, a date I marked in my calendar weeks ago and then promptly forgot about until the reminder call. She never asked about my checkups. Never. "Everything's fine, sweetie," I said, my voice sounding unnaturally calm, even to my own ears. A lifetime of dealing with difficult clients, shady subcontractors, and the occasional brute force of corporate greed had taught me to mask my true feelings. Just a quick once-over. "Old Dave says I'm good for another year." "That's great, Dad. I was just thinking about you. Mark and I were planning to come up for dinner tonight. I know it's last minute, but we're craving your famous chili. Would you mind?" My heart hammered against my ribs. Chili, the rich, spicy scent of it, usually a comfort, now seemed to twist into something sinister. She knew. She somehow knew I'd just seen Dave, and now she wanted to come over tonight. The pieces, disjointed and terrifying, started to click into place. The note, Dave's fear, Sarah's uncanny timing, and the chili. My stomach churned. "Sure, honey," I managed, forcing a chuckle. "Always happy to see you. I'll start a batch." "What time?" "Around 7:30. 8? We'll grab some wine on the way." "See you soon, Dad." "Love you." "Love you too, Sarah," I replied, the words tasting like ash. I hung up the phone, my hand still gripping the receiver. The sun had set now, plunging the kitchen into a deepening twilight. The note lay on the counter, illuminated by the faint glow from the streetlights outside. "Your daughter is trying to kill you." In that moment, a chilling certainty settled over me. Dr. Peterson wasn't paranoid. He had just saved my life, and I knew, with the cold, hard clarity that only true peril can bring, that the chili wasn't the only thing Sarah would be bringing to dinner. The phrase, "love you too, Sarah," echoed in the silence of my kitchen, a hollow mockery. My hand, still on the phone, felt suddenly cold. The sterile scent of Peterson's office had been replaced by the faint, comforting aroma of stale coffee and old wood, the familiar smells of my home. But now, even these felt tainted, overlaid with a creeping sense of dread. I stood there for a long minute, a statue carved from confusion and burgeoning fear. My mind, usually a well-oiled machine for managing construction projects, schedules, budgets, unforeseen complications, was now racing, trying to process this impossible reality. "Your daughter is trying to kill you." The words weren't just a shock. They were an amputation, severing the bedrock of my world. Sarah, my little girl, the one I'd taught to ride a bike, who'd sat on my lap as I read her bedtime stories. The woman who looked so much like Eleanor, with her bright eyes and quick smile. This couldn't be real. But Dave's face, his eyes, they were too real, too raw with terror for an old man's delusion. Dave wasn't prone to flights of fancy. He was a man of science, of facts, of empirical evidence. If Dave Peterson told me my daughter was a threat, then my daughter was a threat. The logical leap was terrifying but undeniable. My eyes fell on the chili pot, sitting innocently on the stove. The famous chili, Eleanor's recipe, passed down to Sarah and me. A comfort food, a staple of family gatherings. Now a potential weapon. My stomach clenched. I had to cook it. I had to play along. To refuse would be to show my hand, to confirm Dave's impossible accusation. And if it was true, if Sarah really was capable of this, then she was capable of anything. I moved with a practiced slowness, the kind you develop after years of physical labor, each movement precise and economical. I opened the fridge, took out the ground beef, onions, peppers. My hands went through the motions, chopping, searing, stirring, but my mind was a whirlwind. What did she stand to gain? Money? My estate wasn't enormous. A comfortable nest egg, enough to live out my days, a good chunk for Sarah when I was gone. But nothing that would drive someone to murder. Unless there was something else. Something I didn't know. I thought of Mark, her boyfriend. He was an investment banker, smooth as polished granite, always impeccably dressed, with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He'd seemed eager to impress, a little too eager, always asking about my health, about my plans for retirement, about the specifics of my business. At the time, I dismissed it as polite interest, the way a potential son-in-law might inquire. Now, it replayed in my mind as something far more sinister. Questions about my financials, my health insurance, the succession plan for my company. He'd even subtly pressed me about Eleanor's old jewelry, the pieces I planned to leave to Sarah. I'd brushed it off, but now, each memory felt like a tiny, insidious barb. They met at some charity gala, she'd told me. He was from a prominent family, old money, Greenwich, Connecticut. The kind of money that breeds a certain kind of entitlement, a casual disregard for anything standing in the way of what they want. Was Mark the orchestrator? Was Sarah a willing participant? Or was she being manipulated? The thought of my daughter, coerced into something so monstrous, was almost as painful as the thought of her being a cold-blooded killer. Almost. I found myself meticulously washing my hands, scrubbing under the nails, a subconscious act of purification. I pulled out a fresh cutting board and new knife. I couldn't contaminate the chili I was making with anything from my own kitchen. I had to ensure its safety for me, and I had to ensure that if there was something in her chili, I could tell the difference. My gaze fell on the old spice rack, a wedding gift from Eleanor's Aunt Martha. Turmeric, paprika, cumin, and a small, unlabeled jar at the back, filled with a crystalline white powder. Salt, I'd always assumed, for quick use. But a tiny, forgotten corner of my mind, a vestige of my youth, flickered. My father, a quiet man who'd seen things in the war, once told me about certain powders. Things that could be disguised, things that could be used to slowly, subtly eliminate a problem. He'd never elaborated, but the memory, dark and formless, now crept into my thoughts. I pushed it away. Too fanciful. This wasn't some spy novel. This was my life. My daughter. The smell of simmering tomatoes and chili powder filled the kitchen, a deceptive warmth. I decided to make 2 batches. One, perfectly normal for me. The other, an identical replica for Sarah and Mark. I'd claim a new recipe, a secret ingredient for mine, to explain any subtle differences. It was a risky play, but I needed a baseline. I needed to know if the threat was real, and if so, how it would manifest. As the clock ticked past 7, I went to my study. I unlocked the bottom drawer of my old oak desk, the one that held Eleanor's cherished photo albums and my will. I pulled out a small, worn leather-bound journal. It wasn't really a journal in the conventional sense. It was a ledger, a lifetime of observations, a repository of lessons learned, secrets kept, and contingency plans for every imaginable scenario. A habit I'd picked up from my grandfather, who'd been a bootlegger during Prohibition, a man who understood the importance of being 5 steps ahead. I flipped to a blank page. Dr. Peterson. Note. Sarah. Mark. Chili. I wrote them down, bald facts, stripped of emotion. Seeing them on paper gave them a strange, terrifying legitimacy. This wasn't a dream. This was happening. I knew my house. Every creak of the floorboards, every draft from a faulty window seal. I knew how to move through it silently, how to observe without being observed. My seemingly ordinary life as a contractor in Westchester, building bespoke homes for the wealthy, had given me a deceptively mundane cover. But before that, before Eleanor, before Sarah, there had been other lives, other skills, buried deep beneath the veneer of suburban comfort. Skills I'd hoped I'd never have to resurrect. I checked the locks on all the windows and doors, a ritual I usually performed without thinking. Tonight, each click of the bolt was deliberate, a small act of defiance against the unknown. I pulled down the shades, obscuring the view from outside. The headlights of a car swept across the living room window, followed by the crunch of tires on my gravel driveway. 7:45. They were here. My heart rate kicked up a notch, a cold, hard knot in my stomach. I took a deep, measured breath, the scent of chili suddenly sharp and metallic. I wiped my hands on a towel, then ran a hand through my thinning gray hair, adjusting my plain flannel shirt. Frank Miller. Just an old man, a widower, a contractor. Harmless. vulnerable. That was the role I had to play. That was the perception I had to maintain. Because you know what's funny about predators? They never see the trap until it's too late. And tonight, my own daughter was walking into one. The question was, whose trap was it? The doorbell chimed, a bright, cheerful sound that grated against the taut nerves humming beneath my skin. I took another steadying breath, letting a familiar, easy smile settle onto my face. It was the smile my clients knew, the one that promised reliability and quiet competence. The smile my construction crews knew meant someone was about to learn a very expensive lesson if they crossed me. Tonight, it was a mask. I opened the door. Sarah stood there, radiant, clutching a bottle of Cabernet. Her eyes, so like Eleanor's, sparkled with an almost unsettling brightness. Beside her, Mark, slick as ever in a tailored blazer, held a small bouquet of grocery store flowers. He had that practiced charm, the kind that feels less like genuine warmth and more like a carefully crafted performance. "Dad," Sarah exclaimed, pulling me into a hug that felt a little too tight, a little too long. I forced myself to return it, to pat her back, to inhale the scent of her expensive perfume. It was a struggle to ignore the subtle tremor in my hand as I finally pulled away. "Hey, sweetie." "Mark?" I greeted, extending a hand to him. His grip was firm, almost aggressively so, but his eyes, scanning past me into the house, were restless. "Come on in, it's cold out there." They stepped inside, bringing with them a gust of chilly air and an immediate shift in the atmosphere of my quiet home. The flowers, bright and colorful, seemed out of place, a splash of artificial cheer in the deepening gloom of my suspicion. "It smells amazing in here, Dad," Sarah chirped, moving towards the kitchen, her eyes immediately drawn to the two identical pots simmering on the stove. "Your famous chili. You never disappoint." "Had a sudden craving myself," I said, forcing another smile. "Decided to try a new variation tonight. A little experiment. We'll see how it turns out." Mark, ever the astute observer, glanced at the two pots, a fleeting flicker of something. Surprise? Confusion? In his eyes before he smoothly recovered. "An experiment, Frank? Always pushing the culinary boundaries, I see." His tone was light, but I caught the underlying question, the subtle probe. "Just having some fun," I replied, moving to the small bar in the living room. "Whiskey, Mark?" "Sarah, wine?" "Just a splash for me, Dad, if you're having one," Sarah said, eyeing the wine bottle she brought. "Mark, why don't you join him?" He nodded, a tight smile on his face. "Certainly. A little something to warm the bones." As I poured the drinks, my back to them, I felt their eyes on me. I could almost hear the silent communication, the exchange of glances. My senses, honed over a lifetime of reading people, were on high alert. Every rustle of clothing, every shift in weight, every subtle change in breathing. They were watching me, and I, in turn, was watching them. I handed Mark his glass of single malt, then turned to Sarah. "Just a little splash for you then, darling." I poured a modest amount of her Cabernet into a glass, careful to use one of the crystal glasses Eleanor had loved. The clink of the ice, the swirl of the whiskey, mundane sounds suddenly charged with meaning. We settled into the living room, the familiar crackle of the fireplace a comforting backdrop. Or it should have been. Instead, it felt like a stage, and we were all actors in a play with a very dark script. Sarah launched into a vivid description of her latest architectural project, a gleaming skyscraper in Lower Manhattan. Mark chimed in with details about a recent IPO, talking about market fluctuations and high-stakes deals. They were good, very good, at projecting an image of success, confidence, and normalcy. Too good. I listened, nodding, making the appropriate interjections, but my mind was elsewhere. It was cataloging, observing, searching for the tell, the slip, the tiny detail that would confirm or deny Dave Peterson's terrifying message. Sarah, normally not one to talk extensively about her personal life, brought up her recent vacation with Mark to the Caribbean. "It was wonderful, Dad. So relaxing. We even talked about, well, future plans." She glanced at Mark, a blush rising on her cheeks. Mark, catching the cue, smiled. "We're thinking about getting engaged, Frank. I hope you approve." The words hung in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. Engagement. Marriage. The formalizing of their relationship. The cementing of their plans. My plans, apparently. That's wonderful news, I said, my voice steady, my smile fixed. Congratulations to you both. I'm very happy for you. The words felt like sandpaper in my throat. This was the motive then. Not just my money, but the combined wealth of my estate, accessible to them once she was my wife. No, once she was his wife. It was an old story, a tale as old as time, but knowing it was being played out with my own flesh and blood, it was a particularly bitter pill to swallow. We moved to the dining room. I had set the table earlier, carefully arranging Eleanor's china, a grim parody of a family dinner. I brought out the two identical chili pots, placing them side by side on trivets. "All right, folks," I announced, tried to infuse my voice with jovial enthusiasm. "The main event. This one," I gestured to the pot on the left, "is my classic. And this," I pointed to the right, "is my new experimental batch. Secret ingredient. I'm going to try the new one tonight. You two can have your pick." Sarah's eyes flickered to the right pot, then back to the left, a fraction of a second too long. Mark, ever the shark, picked up on it. "Well, Frank, I wouldn't want to deprive you of your culinary adventure," he said, a glint in his eye. "Sarah and I will stick to the classic tonight. Wouldn't want to spoil a good thing." "Oh, Mark, don't be silly," Sarah said, a little too quickly. "Dad always tries new things. Maybe we should try it too." "Nonsense, sweetheart," I interjected, my tone firm but friendly. "This is my experiment. You two enjoy the tried and true. Besides, I only made a small batch of the new one. Just enough for me to gauge the taste." They exchanged another look. A silent conversation, sharp and quick, passing between them. I caught a subtle tightening around Mark's jaw, a tiny flicker of annoyance. He wanted me to eat from the classic batch, the one they had clearly intended for me, the one they had likely tampered with. "Well, all right then, Dad," Sarah finally conceded, a forced smile on her lips. "Your house, your rules." My heart pounded. This was it, the moment of truth. I dished out generous portions of chili, placing a bowl of the experimental batch in front of me and 2 bowls of the classic batch in front of Sarah and Mark. The steam rose from the bowls, carrying the rich, familiar aroma. My stomach, despite the terror, rumbled slightly. We started to eat. I watched them, my senses on high alert. Sarah took a tentative spoonful, her eyes on mine. Mark ate with a more confident air, but even he seemed to be watching me, observing my reaction. I took a large spoonful of my chili, chewing slowly, deliberately. The taste was rich, spicy, exactly as it should be. I savored it, letting the warmth spread through me, a small act of defiance. "This is excellent, Dad," Sarah said, her voice a little strained. "Really great. Best chili in Westchester," Mark agreed, raising his glass of wine. "To Frank. And to tradition." "To tradition," I echoed, my eyes meeting theirs across the table. My own glass, filled with water, remained untouched. I hadn't forgotten about the possibility of something in the wine. Trust, I realized, was a luxury I could no longer afford. I continued to eat, making a show of enjoying my meal. But I wasn't just eating. I was observing. I was waiting for the first sign, the first tremor in the carefully constructed facade. Because if Dave was right, if they were trying to kill me, they wouldn't let me walk away from this dinner without ensuring their objective was met. And I had a feeling the real game was only just beginning. The conversation flowed, a polite, stilted dance around the gaping maw of unspoken dread. Sarah talked about her plans to expand her architecture firm, Mark about a potential merger at his investment bank. Their words, usually a source of paternal pride, now felt like a carefully constructed smokescreen, designed to lull me into a false sense of security, or perhaps to distract me from the true purpose of their visit. I kept my gaze on them, but my focus was peripheral, observing every micro-expression, every subtle shift in posture. Sarah's laugh, usually so unrestrained, seemed a little too brittle, a little too quick. Mark, for all his polished veneer, kept unconsciously tapping his finger against the stem of his wine glass, a nervous tick I hadn't noticed before. They were trying to be normal, but the effort was visible, a thin crack in their perfect facade. I continued to eat my chili, slowly, deliberately. It was delicious, just as I'd made it. A small, self-satisfied part of me took perverse pleasure in this fact. They had prepared for me, but I had prepared for them. Then, Sarah subtly steered the conversation. "Dad, I've been meaning to talk to you about the house." My ears perked up. Here it was, the real agenda. The house. I asked, feigning casual curiosity. "What about it?" "Well, it's a big place for just one person," she began, her tone soft, almost solicitous. "And with your health. I mean, you're not getting any younger, Dad. Mark and I were thinking perhaps it's time to consider something smaller. A nice condo, maybe closer to the city. Easier to manage, less upkeep." Mark nodded, chiming in, "She's right, Frank. This place is charming, of course, but it's a lot of work. Property taxes in Westchester are brutal. And that old furnace? A money pit waiting to happen." He chuckled, a sound that grated on my nerves. My hand tightened around my spoon. My home, the place where Eleanor and I had raised Sarah. Every beam, every nail, every brick of this house I had either built or maintained myself. It was more than just a house. It was a repository of memories, a testament to a life well lived. And they wanted to take it from me. Not just me, but the memories, the very ground I stood on. "I'm perfectly fine with the upkeep, thank you," I said, my voice maintaining its calm, even tone. The kind of calm that comes from years of learning to control every outward reaction, no matter the internal turmoil. And my health, as Dr. Peterson confirmed this morning, is perfectly robust for a man my age. I watched their faces. A flicker of something, frustration, annoyance, passed between them. The mention of Dr. Peterson seemed to throw them off balance. "Of course, Dad," Sarah said, her voice a little less steady. "It was just a thought. We just worry about you." "I appreciate your concern," I said, looking directly at Mark. "But I've always been quite self-sufficient. And this house is more than just bricks and mortar to me. It's home. It's where I belong." The unspoken message hung heavy in the air. "You're not getting my house." Not yet. The dinner continued, punctuated by forced pleasantries. As we finished the chili, Sarah pushed her bowl forward, a small amount still remaining. "Dad, can I try a little of your experimental batch? Just a spoonful. I'm so curious." My senses screamed. This was it. This was the trap. She wasn't going to let me walk away without confirming if the classic chili had worked. And if I hadn't eaten enough, or if it hadn't worked, she needed to know. She needed me to eat something from the contaminated batch. Or, perhaps, she needed to ensure she knew which was which for some future scheme. "Oh, darling, I'd love to share," I said, a look of genuine regret on my face. "But I finished it all. It was just a small portion, remember? I'm afraid you missed out on my secret ingredient tonight." I smiled, a small, benign smile that belied the ice flowing through my veins. Sarah's face fell, a shadow passing over her features. Mark's jaw tightened visibly. They looked at each other, a quick, almost imperceptible glance. They were clearly communicating. "Well, maybe next time, Dad," Sarah said, trying to recover. "Maybe," I agreed, already formulating my next move. They wouldn't give up easily. Not now. Not after this. The rest of the evening was a blur of polite conversation, coffee, and a quickly fading atmosphere of familial warmth. They left around 9:30, promising to call soon. As soon as their car pulled out of the driveway, I felt an overwhelming wave of exhaustion, a profound weariness that settled deep in my bones. I walked to the kitchen, the silence of the house once again a heavy presence. The two chili pots sat on the stove, silent witnesses. I looked at the bowls they had used. Mark's was clean, scraped almost bare. Sarah's had a small amount left. I carefully scooped the remaining chili from Sarah's bowl into a small, sterile container. Then I did the same with a portion from the classic pot they had eaten from. From my own pot, the experimental one, I took another sample. 3 samples. Evidence. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk again, retrieved my ledger. I made new entries, detailing the conversation about the house, Sarah's attempt to taste my chili, their reactions. Facts. Observations. No emotion. The truth, I knew, lay hidden in the details. My next step was clear. I needed to analyze the chili. My mind went back to my father's vague warnings, to the unlabeled jar of white powder on the spice rack. It was a long shot, but I couldn't afford to miss anything. I didn't have a full lab, but I had enough experience, enough contacts, enough resources to get some answers. I made a phone call. Not to Dave Peterson. Not yet. He was probably under observation, or worse. No, I called an old friend, a former colleague from a past life, a chemist who now ran a discreet analytical lab out of a secluded industrial park in upstate New York. He owed me a favor, a big one. He understood discretion. "Leo," I said, my voice low, without preamble. "I need a rush job. Something sensitive. Organic compounds. Toxins specifically. Trace amounts." There was a pause on the other end. Leo didn't ask questions. He never did. "Send it to the usual P.O. box, Frank." "What's the deadline?" 24 hours, I said. "It's life or death." "Understood," Leo replied, his voice flat, devoid of surprise. "It will be done." I sealed the samples, carefully labeling them. My own, Sarah's marks. I would drive them to the drop box myself. Tonight. The urgency was palpable. As I prepared to leave, my eyes fell on a framed photograph on the mantelpiece. Eleanor, smiling, vibrant, holding young Sarah on her hip. Eleanor's eyes, so full of warmth and love, met mine from the faded image. A surge of grief, mixed with a potent cocktail of anger and a chilling resolve, washed over me. This wasn't just about my life anymore. This was about Eleanor's legacy, about the daughter we had raised, about the betrayal that threatened to unravel everything we had built. I would find out what they had done, and I would make them pay. You know what's funny about those who think they can outsmart an old man? They forget that old men have a lifetime of mistakes and a lifetime of lessons learned. And sometimes those lessons are paid for in blood. And tonight, I was ready to collect. The drive to Leo's discreet P.O. box, nestled in a dimly lit corner of a rundown industrial complex an hour north, was a solitary, tension-filled journey. The late autumn night was cold and clear, the moon a sliver of bone in the velvet sky. My old F-150 hummed along, its familiar vibrations a rhythmic counterpoint to the chaotic thoughts in my head. Each mile marker that passed felt like a step further into a new, unwelcome reality. I pulled up to the designated drop-off, a nondescript, reinforced box built into a crumbling brick wall. It looked like something out of a Cold War spy movie. I punched in the code, the heavy steel door creaking open with a low groan. Inside, a small, insulated compartment awaited. I carefully placed the 3 labeled containers of chili, each a tiny parcel of potential damnation, into the compartment. The door swung shut with a muffled thud, sealing them away. The transaction was done. Now, the agonizing wait. The journey back home was even more disquieting. The initial adrenaline rush had faded, leaving behind a gnawing emptiness. The cold certainty that had settled over me earlier was now battling with flashes of doubt, whispers of an alternate, saner explanation. Could Dave really have been mistaken? Could Sarah and Mark really be so calculating, so devoid of human decency? The question was a venomous snake, coiling and striking at the fragile hope that still lingered. I got back to the house, the clock on the kitchen wall showing past midnight. The silence was profound, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. I poured myself a stronger scotch this time, the burn in my throat a welcome distraction from the chill in my soul. I walked into my study, my sanctuary. The ledger lay open on the desk. I sat down, the familiar leather creaking under me. My gaze fell on Eleanor's photograph again, her smile a haunting reminder of what I stood to lose or had already lost. I ran a finger over her image, then moved to Sarah's picture, a school photo from when she was 10, gap-toothed and beaming. Was that innocence a lie? Had it always been? Or had something or someone twisted her into this monstrous caricature? I closed my eyes, letting memories flood in. The day she was born, tiny and perfect in my arms. Her first steps, her first scraped knee, my hand, holding hers, walking her to her first day of kindergarten. the pride swelling in my chest when she graduated top of her class from Yale, following Eleanor's footsteps. Each memory was a shard of glass, cutting deeper with the knowledge that it might all be a meticulously crafted illusion. My father's voice, a gravelly whisper from the past, echoed in my mind. Always watch their feet, son. A man can lie with his words, and even with his eyes, but his feet, they always tell the truth. It was a lesson he'd passed down, one of many from a life lived on the fringes, navigating treacherous waters. I remembered Mark's nervous finger-tapping, Sarah's forced laughter. Small tells, perhaps. Or perhaps just my heightened paranoia. Sleep was an impossibility. I spent the rest of the night in the study, reviewing old files, checking my financial statements, rereading my will. Everything was in order, legally sound. My assets were primarily in real estate and investments, straightforward and transparent. Eleanor's jewelry, the modest trust she'd set up, everything was accounted for. There were no hidden clauses, no secret beneficiaries. Unless the plan was to simply remove me from the equation and then deal with the legalities later, through probate. A quick death, and then a quick grab. It was sickeningly simple. As dawn broke, painting the sky with bruised purples and grays, I made myself a strong pot of coffee. The waiting was the hardest part. The uncertainty, the mental acrobatics required to reconcile the daughter I knew with the potential killer I now suspected. Around 10 in the morning, my phone rang. It was Leo. My heart leaped into my throat. Frank, Leo's voice was, as always, devoid of emotion, a professional flatness that now carried an unsettling weight. The samples. I have the results. And I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The experimental sample, he said, referring to my own chili, is clean. Pure ingredients. No foreign substances detected. A small, hollow wave of relief washed over me, quickly followed by a fresh surge of dread. And the others? Sarah's and Mark's? There was a brief pause. Both samples from the classic batch contained trace amounts of a potent neurotoxin, difficult to detect without specific testing. Designed to be slow-acting, cumulative, causes disorientation, cognitive decline, eventually organ failure. Mimics natural aging processes. Very clever. My blood ran cold. Neurotoxin. Slow-acting. Cumulative. It wasn't meant to kill me at dinner. It was meant to slowly, subtly erase me. To turn me into a shadow of myself. A senile old man whose natural death would be easily explained away. The ultimate betrayal. The ultimate cruelty. What kind of neurotoxin, Leo? I asked, my voice a strained rasp. Derived from a rare South American plant. Very specialized. Not something you pick up at your local hardware store. Requires significant sourcing and expertise. And a very steady hand with dosage. My mind flashed to Mark's slick demeanor, his carefully cultivated air of global sophistication. Rare plants, specialized toxins. It sounded like something he could source, something he could coordinate. And Sarah, had she known? Had she stood by, watching as I was slowly poisoned, all for a house and an inheritance? Thank you, Leo. I managed, my voice heavy with a grim new resolve. You just saved my life. You're welcome, Frank. Be careful out there. The line went dead. I sat there, the phone heavy in my hand. The last vestiges of doubt, the fragile hopes, had been violently extinguished. Dave Peterson wasn't paranoid. He was a hero, and my daughter, my own flesh and blood, was indeed trying to kill me. With her boyfriend, Mark, as the likely architect. The rage that surged through me was cold and pure, a white-hot fury that bypassed the usual channels of anger and settled into a quiet, unwavering resolve. It wasn't a childish tantrum. It was the measured, strategic anger of a man who had seen too much, lost too much, and was now faced with the ultimate betrayal. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about justice, about making them understand the true cost of their callous ambition. They thought I was an old man, easily fooled, easily dispatched. They underestimated me. They underestimated the years I'd spent in the trenches, the battles I'd fought, the lessons I'd learned from men far more dangerous than Mark, far more cunning than Sarah. My phone buzzed again. It was Sarah. Her timing, once again, was impeccable, almost sickeningly so. I let it ring, watching the screen. After a few rings, it stopped. A moment later, a text message came through. "Hey Dad, just checking in. Feeling okay this morning? Thinking of you. XOXO." The casual affection, the feigned concern, was like a fresh stab wound. Thinking of me, all right. Thinking of me, slowly fading away. I stared at the message, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. They wanted a game? Fine. I would give them a game. A game they would never forget. I typed a reply, my fingers steady. "Feeling great, honey. Never better. Thanks for checking in. The chili was delicious last night. Thinking I might make another batch soon. Might even try that secret ingredient one again. Cheers, Dad." I hit send. The message, innocent on its surface, was a silent declaration of war. They had fired the first shot. And now, I would return fire. Not with a bang, but with a series of precise, calculated moves that would dismantle their carefully constructed world, piece by agonizing piece. They thought they were playing chess, but I had always preferred poker, and I had a full house. And they were about to learn what happens when you try to bluff a man who knows all the tells. The reply came almost instantly. "Great to hear, Dad. Glad you enjoyed it. Definitely make that secret ingredient batch again. Love you." The message was filled with emojis. A heart, a smiling face, a kissy face, a saccharine display of affection that now tasted like poison. They wanted to know if their weapon had landed, if the first dose was doing its work. My cheerful response would reassure them, make them complacent. And complacency, I knew, was a far deadlier toxin than anything they could concoct. I leaned back in my chair, the chill in the air forgotten. My mind, usually focused on the pragmatics of construction, was now a chessboard, visualizing moves, anticipating countermoves. My life, my very existence, was now the highest stake. My first priority was protecting myself and securing undeniable proof. I couldn't risk eating anything prepared by Sarah or Mark again. I'd have to feign a sudden, inexplicable loss of appetite, a change in diet, or perhaps even a preference for home-cooked meals, citing newfound dietary restrictions. It would be a delicate dance, as any deviation from my routine could raise suspicion. The next step, confirm the source of their elaborate poison scheme. Leo had mentioned a rare South American plant. That meant international connections, specialized knowledge. Mark, the globe-trotting investment banker, fit the profile perfectly. He had the resources, the connections, and the ruthless ambition. But how to prove it? I spent the next few days in a quiet, almost meditative state of preparation. I called my office manager, Maria, a no-nonsense woman who'd been with me for 20 years. "Maria," I said, my voice carefully neutral, "I'm taking a brief leave of absence. Some personal matters. I'll be available by phone, but I need you to handle everything. No questions, please. Just my full confidence in your abilities." Maria, ever loyal and discreet, simply said, "Understood, Mr. Miller. Take care of yourself." My first subtle move was to adjust my diet. When Sarah called a few days later, suggesting lunch, I politely declined, citing a sudden sensitivity to certain foods. "Just try to eat healthier, honey. Doctor's orders, you know how it is." She pressed a little, but I held firm. The less I consumed outside my own control, the safer I was. Then I turned my attention to Mark. Investment bankers, especially the ambitious ones, often operated in a world of cutthroat competition. Blackmail, insider trading, corporate espionage. These were not uncommon tools of the trade. Mark's family money, the old Greenwich lineage, could provide a shield, but also a target. Old money always had skeletons in the closet. And new money, especially money acquired quickly and ruthlessly, often left a trail. I reactivated an old network, a group of individuals from my past, from that other life before Eleanor. They were ghosts, shadows in the digital and physical underworld, skilled in information gathering, surveillance, and discreet leverage. Their names would never appear on any official roster, their faces unseen by most. But they were effective, and they owed me. My first call was to a man named Silas, an expert in digital forensics and discrete data extraction. He'd once helped me track down a subcontractor who tried to vanish with a substantial payment. Silas, I said, when he picked up on the burner phone I'd acquired, I need a deep dive. Mark Harrison, investment banker, family in Greenwich. I need everything you can find. Financial irregularities, any offshore accounts, any past indiscretions. And I need to know where he gets his specialized supplies. Silas chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. Specialized supplies, Frank? You in the rare orchid business now. Something like that, Silas, I replied, a grim smile touching my lips. And the orchids are poisonous. Understood, he said, the levity gone from his voice. Consider it done. Anything specific to look for? Connections to South America, I said. Anything involving rare botanical imports. And any large, unexplained cash transactions. Got it. Give me a week. Maybe less. While Silas started his digital hunt, I began my own physical reconnaissance. I drove to Greenwich, to the opulent, tree-lined streets where Mark's family resided. His parents' sprawling estate was a monument to old money, understated yet undeniably powerful. I staked out their house, not looking for anything specific, but just observing, feeling out the rhythm of their lives, the subtle signs of wealth and influence. Old money, I knew, often valued reputation above all else. Any scandal, any stain could be catastrophic. I also paid a discreet visit to Mark's condo building in Manhattan. A sleek, modern structure in a high-rise district, all glass and steel. Expensive, impersonal. I noted the security, the layout, the typical patterns of arrival and departure. Knowledge, even seemingly insignificant details, could become a weapon. Meanwhile, Sarah continued her routine of dutiful daughter, calling me daily, sometimes twice a day. Just checking in, Dad, she'd say, her voice dripping with artificial concern. How are you feeling? Still eating healthy? Never better, sweetie. I'd always reply, my voice cheerful, strong. Got a surge of energy lately. Must be all the clean eating. Each lie felt like a victory. Each false reassurance a tiny chip in their confidence. They thought they were slowly winning, that I was a ticking clock. I was letting them believe it. The calls with Dave Peterson, however, were more challenging. I managed to call him from a secure line, using another burner phone. His voice was strained, wary. Dave, it's Frank. Are you all right? Frank, he whispered. I think so. But my wife, Martha, she's been getting these anonymous calls. Threats, telling me to keep my mouth shut. And I had a visit from a couple of, well, men in dark suits. Very polite, very firm. Said they were from regulatory compliance and had some questions about my practice, my licenses. My blood boiled. They were trying to silence him, to discredit him, to intimidate him into retreating. Did you tell them anything, Dave? I asked, my voice hard. No, he said, his voice stronger now, laced with defiance. I just told them my patient records were confidential. But they implied that if anything were to happen to you, Frank, I would be held responsible for not reporting suspicious behavior to the authorities. They're trying to pin it on you if they succeed. I concluded, the pieces falling into place. Try to set you up. Don't worry, Dave. You did the right thing. Just keep your head down. Don't talk to anyone about this. And if they show up again, record everything you can discreetly. What are you going to do, Frank? He asked, a tremor in his voice. I'm going to make sure they regret ever crossing an old man and his doctor, I said, my gaze drifting to Eleanor's photo. And I'm going to make sure you're safe. 3 days after contacting Silas, another call came in on the burner phone. Frank, it's Silas. I have some interesting things for you. His voice was low, conspiratorial. Harrison has a ghost in his past. A small investment firm he founded right out of business school before he joined the big leagues. It went belly up, left a trail of angry investors and a few missing millions. He covered it up well, paid off some people, but the records are still there if you know where to dig. Excellent. I murmured, a slow smile spreading across my face. What else? And his specialized supplies. He's got an interesting connection. A shell corporation registered in Panama, linked to a research facility in Medellin, Colombia. They specialize in ethnobotanical research, a fancy name for finding new ways to extract rare compounds from plants. And they've had some unusual shipments. Nothing illegal on paper, but a lot of highly potent biological samples crossing borders with questionable documentation. Medellin, rare South American plants, neurotoxin. It all fit. Mark wasn't just an ambitious banker. He was a meticulous, ruthless operator, and he had a clear pattern of getting what he wanted by any means necessary. And Sarah's involvement? I asked. No direct financial links to the Shell Corporation, Frank. Her accounts are clean, but there's a consistent pattern of large transfers from Mark to her, disguised as gifts or loans. Nothing illegal, but it shows she's being compensated. Or bought. The last sliver of doubt about Sarah's complicity vanished, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. She was in on it. She was a willing participant, perhaps even a co-conspirator. The woman who bore Eleanor's eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating opportunist. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. Silas, I said, my voice hardening, I need you to compile everything. Every detail, every irregularity, every connection. Package it, encrypt it, and send it to a few strategic locations. And I need a way to leak it, anonymously, at the precise moment I choose. Consider it done, Frank, Silas replied. He won't know what hit him. I hung up the phone. The pieces were now in place. I had motive, means, and now irrefutable proof. They had underestimated me. They had seen an old man, a soft target. But they hadn't seen the steel beneath the flannel, the lifetime of hard-won wisdom, the network of old debts and hidden skills that lay dormant, waiting to be called upon. They thought they were playing a subtle, slow game. But I was about to accelerate the timeline, and the game they were about to enter was one they were entirely unprepared for. My next move required finesse, a subtle tightening of the noose. I decided to make myself appear more vulnerable, more susceptible to their machinations. This would lull them into a false sense of security, making them overconfident and therefore sloppy. A few days later, Sarah called. Dad, how are you really feeling? You sound a little distant. Are you sure you're all right? Actually, sweetie, I said, adopting a slight tremor in my voice, a subtle hesitation. I've been feeling a bit forgetful lately, misplacing things. Can't quite recall where I put my keys half the time. And these headaches, persistent. I paused, letting the words hang in the air, hinting at the slow, creeping effects of their poison. There was a moment of silence on the other end, then Sarah's voice, a little too eager, a little too bright. Oh, Dad, I'm so sorry to hear that. Maybe you should see Dr. Peterson again. I saw him just last week. I lied smoothly. He just said it was probably age. Getting old, I suppose. I chuckled, a weak, self-deprecating sound. It's a real nuisance, though. Makes me wonder if I'm fit to manage everything anymore. The business, the house. This was the hook. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, the greedy anticipation. Dad, you know you don't have to worry about any of that, she exclaimed, her voice suddenly brimming with concern. Mark and I would be more than happy to help you manage things. We could even look into getting you a live-in aide, just to make sure you're comfortable. That's very thoughtful of you, honey, I said, my voice trailing off as if deep in thought. Maybe I should consider it. All this responsibility is starting to feel a bit heavy. Of course, Dad, she chirped. We'll come up this weekend. We can sit down, go through everything. Make sure you're taken care of. This weekend sounds good. I agreed, a cold satisfaction settling in my gut. I'll be here. The trap was set. They were coming to assess the damage, to push me further down the path they had envisioned for my slow decline. They would look for weakness. I would give them exactly what they expected. The next few days, I prepared my house for their visit. Not in the usual way of tidying up, but in a far more strategic sense. I installed discrete cameras in key areas of the house: the study, the living room, the dining room. Small, pinhole lenses, practically invisible, connected to a secure server. I wanted every word, every gesture, every subtle interaction recorded. Evidence, if it ever came to that, would be undeniable. I also made a point of leaving certain documents in plain sight on my desk in the study. My will, a folder labeled business assets, another marked financial statements, all carefully curated to give them a glimpse into my supposed vulnerability, to make them believe their ultimate prize was within reach. The documents were real, but the context was a lie. They were seeing what I wanted them to see. On Friday afternoon, just hours before their arrival, I received Silas's encrypted package. It contained a comprehensive dossier on Mark Harrison, his past firm's collapse, the suppressed lawsuits, the offshore accounts, the details of the Panamanian Shell Corporation, the Medellin Ethnobotanical Research Facility, and the questionable biological shipments. There was even a meticulously traced payment, a hefty sum, from Mark's personal account to an individual identified only as the botanist in Colombia around the time Sarah had started talking about my health more often. The dots connected with sickening precision. Along with the dossier, Silas provided me with a secure, anonymous dead-drop email address and instructions for activating a timed, untraceable leak of the information to multiple media outlets and regulatory bodies, including the SEC. The leak was designed to detonate with devastating force, crippling Mark's career and exposing his criminal activities. All I had to do was press a button. But timing was everything. I printed out a few key documents from the dossier, selectively chosen to raise suspicion without revealing my full hand. I placed them in a folder labeled Confidential, Mark Harrison, and then, with deliberate carelessness, left it on top of a stack of old magazines in the living room, partially obscured, as if I'd forgotten about it. It was a tempting piece of bait, designed to be discovered. The doorbell rang at precisely 6 o'clock. Mark and Sarah stood on my porch, their smiles bright, their eyes predatory. "Dad, you look, well, a little tired," Sarah said, her voice laced with concern, but her eyes held a hint of satisfaction. She noticed the subtle changes, the deliberate decline I had orchestrated. "Just a rough week, honey," I said, mustering a weak smile. The memories playing tricks on me. I touched my temple, feigning a headache. Mark, ever the pragmatist, immediately took charge. "Frank, why don't we go straight to your study? We can go over some of these financial documents you mentioned. Get everything organized for you." "Sounds good, Mark," I said, leading them to the study. I watched them closely as we walked through the living room. Sarah's eyes darted around, assessing the space. Mark, however, almost imperceptibly slowed his pace as he passed the stack of magazines. His gaze flickered to the partially hidden folder, then back to me, his expression perfectly neutral. He'd seen it. The bait had been taken. In the study, I ushered them to the large oak desk. I'd placed my will prominently on top, alongside the folders I'd prepared. Mark sat down, pulling out his laptop, a sleek, expensive machine. Sarah perched on the edge of the guest chair, her gaze sweeping over the room, no doubt looking for any signs of disarray that would confirm my supposed mental decline. "All right, Frank," Mark began, his tone professional, yet imbued with an underlying air of control. "Let's start with your will. Are there any recent changes you've been considering?" "No changes, Mark," I said, my voice firm. "It's exactly as Eleanor and I discussed. Sarah gets the house, the bulk of the estate. A few specific bequests to charity. Nothing complicated." Sarah's face, usually so composed, betrayed a flash of greed, quickly masked. "Dad, you really don't have to worry about any of this. We'll make sure everything is handled properly." "I'm sure you will," I replied, my gaze meeting hers. A silent challenge passed between us. As Mark opened his laptop, ostensibly to review my documents, I excused myself. "I just need a moment, a glass of water. These headaches, you know." I walked out of the study, leaving the door slightly ajar. I moved silently to the living room, positioning myself just outside the study's line of sight, but where the hidden camera had a clear view of the desk. I knew what they would do. Seconds later, I heard the subtle creak of the desk chair. Then, a faint rustle of paper. I imagined Mark, his movements swift and practiced, snatching the confidential Mark Harrison folder. I pictured him quickly scanning its contents, his eyes widening as he recognized the damaging information. A few minutes later, I heard Sarah's urgent whisper. "Mark, what is it? What have you found?" Then Mark's voice, sharp with alarm. "Frank knows, Sarah. He knows everything." A triumphant, bone-chilling calm settled over me. They had confirmed it. They had admitted their guilt implicitly to each other into my hidden cameras. The game was no longer theoretical. It was real. I walked back into the study, a glass of water in my hand, a look of benign confusion on my face. Mark stood by the desk, the folder clutched in his hand, his usually smooth facade completely shattered. Sarah's face was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and dawning comprehension. "Everything all right in here?" I asked, my voice calm, almost innocent. "You two look like you've seen a ghost." Mark slowly lowered the folder, his gaze fixed on mine, a terrible realization dawning in his eyes. "Frank," he began, his voice strained. "What is this?" I smiled, a slow, predatory smile that held no warmth. "Oh, that? Just some old research. A project I've been working on in my spare time. You know, old men and their hobbies." I paused, letting the silence stretch, thick with their terror. "And speaking of hobbies, Mark, I've also become quite adept at tracking rare orchids, especially the poisonous kind." The color drained from Sarah's face. Mark's jaw tightened. They stared at me, no longer seeing an old, ailing man. They saw the hunter, the one who had laid the trap, and was now closing in for the kill. The charade was over. The truth was out, and the game had just entered its most dangerous phase. The silence in the study was suffocating, punctuated only by the distant hum of the refrigerator and the frantic thumping of my own heart, now beating a powerful, steady rhythm of resolve. Mark's eyes, usually so calculating and devoid of real emotion, were wide with a dawning, terrifying realization. Sarah's face was a mask of stark terror, her carefully constructed composure having completely crumbled. "Frank, what are you talking about?" Mark stammered, his voice losing its usual slick confidence. He still held the folder, a damning piece of evidence that he'd just admitted to reading. "I think you know exactly what I'm talking about, Mark," I replied, my voice low and steady, as steel cable beneath velvet. I set my glass of water down on the desk, the soft clink a jarring sound in the tense quiet. "The neurotoxin, Mark. The slow-acting, cumulative kind. The one derived from a rare South American plant. The one your shell corporation in Panama, linked to that ethnobotanical research facility in Medellin, Colombia, has been importing." Sarah let out a small, choked gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. She looked at Mark, then back at me, her eyes pleading, searching for a way out of the corner I had just backed them into. Mark, however, was a different beast. Even cornered, his predatory instincts flared. "This is ridiculous, Frank. You're an old man. You're clearly confused. Those are baseless accusations. You've been reading too many spy novels." He tried to force a laugh, but came out as a weak, strangled sound. "This folder, it's just some random papers. I was just tidying up for you." He attempted a dismissive wave of the folder, as if to throw it aside, but his grip remained tight. "Tidying up?" I asked, my smile unwavering, but now edged with a dangerous chill. "Funny, Mark, because the timestamp on the surveillance footage from earlier shows you specifically picking up that folder from the living room, bringing it in here, and immediately reading its contents. All while I was conveniently out of the room, getting my water for my headaches." I gestured vaguely towards the ceiling, where a discreet pinhole camera was nestled. "The cameras, Mark. They caught it all. Your expressions, your whispered conversation with Sarah, your desperate attempt to deny what you already know." The color drained from Mark's face. He glanced up, then back at me, the bravado draining from him like water from a sieve. Sarah, beside him, seemed to shrink, her body language screaming defeat. "Frank, please," Sarah whimpered, her voice cracking. "Dad, you don't understand. Mark, he pressured me. He said it was the only way. He said you were in the way." "In the way of what, Sarah?" I asked, my voice suddenly sharp, cutting through her pathetic excuse. "In the way of my house, my money, my life." The pain in my chest was a raw, aching wound, but I refused to let it show. This wasn't about pity. This was about accountability. Mark's gaze hardened. He was a cornered animal, and he was realizing the full extent of the trap. "You think you've won, old man?" he snarled, dropping the folder onto the desk with a thump. "You think a few hidden cameras and some wild accusations are going to stand up in court against my legal team?" My family has resources you can't even begin to imagine. We'll bury you. We'll discredit you. We'll say you're senile, paranoid. And Dr. Peterson? He'll lose his license, his entire career. You'll be ruined, and then you'll still end up dead. His threat, however crude, carried weight. I knew the power of old money, the insidious reach of influence. They could certainly try to bury me, but I had prepared for that. You're right, Mark. I conceded, surprising them both. Your family does have resources, and you're very good at covering your tracks. I'm just an old man, after all. Who would believe me? I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a near whisper, compelling them to lean in, to listen. But I also have friends. Friends who specialize in things that don't leave paper trails. Friends who owe me favors. Big favors. I paused, letting my words sink in. Silas, for example, is very good at digital forensics. He's already compiled a rather extensive dossier on you, Mark. Everything from your little investment firm scam right out of Yale, the one that disappeared along with a few million from unsuspecting investors, to the details of your Panamanian shell corporation and your exotic botanical imports from Medellin. And the payments, Mark, the payments to the botanist. All of it. Mark's face was now a sickly shade of gray. You're bluffing, he rasped, but his eyes betrayed him. He knew I wasn't. Am I? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Because Silas has already sent copies of that dossier to every major financial regulator in the country, the SEC, the Department of Justice, even a few investigative journalists known for their tenacity. All encrypted, all with a dead man's switch. If anything happens to me, Mark, or to Dr. Peterson, or to anyone else I care about, that information is released. Instantly, irrevocably, and anonymously. The air left Mark's lungs in a sudden whoosh. Sarah gasped, a sound of utter despair. The magnitude of my countermove had hit them. Their entire world, built on deceit and ambition, was about to come crashing down. No, you wouldn't, Mark whispered, his eyes darting frantically around the room, as if searching for an escape. Oh, but I would, Mark, I said, my voice as cold and sharp as winter ice. Because unlike you, I have nothing left to lose. My wife is gone. My daughter, well, she's gone too in a way. You tried to take my life, and you almost succeeded. But you forgot one thing. An old man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous kind of enemy. I looked at Sarah, my gaze softening, but only slightly. The pain was still there, a dull ache. Sarah, you could have asked. You could have waited. I would have given you everything. But you chose this path. You chose greed over family. You chose murder over love. Tears welled in her eyes, silent and copious, tracing paths down her pale cheeks. She looked like a lost child, but the image was shattered by the cold, calculating greed I had seen in her just moments before. So, here's how this is going to go. I continued, my voice firm, asserting control. First, you will both leave this house. Immediately. You will never set foot on my property again. If you do, the dead man's switch is activated. Mark clenched his fists, his face a mask of impotent rage. You can't just... Oh, but I can, Mark. I interrupted, my eyes holding his. Second, you will both sign over any and all rights to my estate. Sarah, your name will be removed from my will. All of it. To charity. Every last penny. This house, the business, everything. And you, Mark, will stay far away from me, from Dr. Peterson, and from any of my associates. If I so much as hear a whisper of you interfering in our lives, the dead man's switch is activated. And your career, your family's reputation, your very freedom will vanish in a flash. Mark stood there, breathing heavily, his chest heaving with fury. But there was also fear in his eyes. He knew I meant it. He knew I had him. And finally, I said, rising from my chair, my posture straight, my voice resonating with unyielding authority, you will both understand that this isn't about revenge, Mark. It's about justice. It's about consequences. You try to take everything from me, and now you will lose everything. I walked to the study door and opened it wide. Get out. Sarah stood up, her legs trembling. She glanced at Mark, then at me, her eyes filled with a desperate, unspoken plea. But I offered no comfort, no absolution. The daughter I had loved was dead to me. Mark, his face still a thundercloud of hatred and defeat, slowly walked past me, a phantom of his former arrogant self. Sarah followed, her head bowed, her shoulders slumped. As she passed, she paused, her hand reaching out as if to touch my arm. "Dad," she whispered, her voice broken. I didn't flinch. I just looked at her, my eyes cold and unyielding. "The choice was yours, Sarah," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "And you made it." She dropped her hand, turned, and walked out, Mark waiting for her by the front door. I watched them walk to their car, a silent, empty space now forming in my life where my daughter once stood. The engine roared to life, tires squealed on the gravel, and they were gone. I closed the door, the click of the lock a final definitive sound. The silence of the house settled around me once more, but this time it was different. It was a clean silence, a quiet born of resolution, not dread. The storm had passed, but the landscape of my life was irrevocably changed. I was an old man, alone, but I was alive, and I had kept my honor. And that, I realized, was a victory worth any price. The aftermath was a strange blend of profound emptiness and a quiet, grim satisfaction. The house, once filled with the phantom echoes of Eleanor and Sarah's laughter, now felt truly silent, its walls holding only the weight of my own solitude. The lingering scent of the chili, once a symbol of domestic comfort, now brought with it a metallic tang of betrayal. I walked back into the study, the scene of the final confrontation. The folder I had used as bait still lay on the desk. I picked it up, feeling its weight, a tangible reminder of the battle I had just fought and won. I shredded it, along with every other physical piece of evidence I had kept. The digital dossier, the encrypted information, was safe, waiting. My first act, after they were gone, was to make another call to Dave Peterson. Using my secure line, I explained everything, leaving no detail out. His relief was palpable. "Thank God, Frank," he said, his voice trembling. "I've been living in a nightmare. Those men, they were relentless. I thought I was going to lose everything." "You won't, Dave," I assured him, my voice firm. "They're dealt with, and the threats against you and Martha will stop. If they don't, you let me know immediately. The dead man's switch isn't just for me." "Thank you, Frank. From the bottom of my heart. You saved my life, too." "We save each other's, old friend," I replied, a rare warmth spreading through me. It was a small comfort, knowing that in the wreckage of my own family, I had at least protected a loyal friend. The next few weeks were a period of quiet consolidation. I instructed Maria to begin the process of liquidating my contracting business. It was time to step away from the relentless demands, the endless battles with subcontractors and regulations. I'd built a good life, a solid reputation, but the joy had gone out of it. The business, like much of my past, needed to be laid to rest. I called my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Evelyn Hayes, who had handled my affairs for decades. I explained the situation, omitting only the more covert details of my methods. Evelyn, a shrewd observer of human nature, simply listened, her expression unreadable. "So, you want to remove Sarah from your will entirely?" she asked when I finished, her voice calm. "Entirely," I confirmed. "And the entire estate, including the house, is to go into a charitable trust for disadvantaged youth, vocational training scholarships. Something meaningful." Evelyn nodded, her pen poised over her legal pad. "Understood. And what about Mark Harrison? Do you intend to pursue legal action against him?" "No," I said, a grim satisfaction in my voice. "I've already initiated a process that will ensure he faces justice. It just won't be through conventional channels or on my direct behalf. And I want it to be a slow burn, Evelyn. A very public, very painful downfall. He needs to lose everything, piece by piece, just as he intended for me." Evelyn looked at me, a flicker of something that might have been admiration in her eyes. "Understood, Mr. Miller. Consider it done." She didn't ask for details, a testament to her professionalism and her understanding of my methods. The dead man's switch, the automated leak of Silas's dossier, remained poised, a silent sword of Damocles hanging over Mark and Sarah. I had set a timer for its activation, not immediately, but in a few weeks. Enough time for them to believe they had escaped, to perhaps even begin rebuilding their lives before the hammer fell. I wanted them to feel the false sense of security, to breathe a sigh of relief before their world imploded. It was a cruel calculation, perhaps, but they had earned it. I lived quietly in my house, preparing for its eventual sale. I walked the familiar rooms, touching the surfaces Eleanor had touched, remembering the laughter that had once filled these spaces. The memories were still bittersweet, but they were no longer poisoned by the presence of a traitor. About 3 weeks later, the first tremors began. It started with a quiet news article buried deep in the financial section of an online newspaper, hinting at an investigation into an unnamed investment banker with ties to a defunct firm and questionable offshore activities. Then came the whispers, the anonymous tips to financial bloggers. Soon, the story gained traction, propelled by the relentless current of internet speculation. Mark Harrison's name, initially shielded, slowly began to emerge. The SEC launched an official inquiry. Articles detailing the collapse of his first firm, the missing millions, the alleged cover-up, started to appear everywhere. His reputation, his career, his carefully constructed life began to unravel with breathtaking speed. I saw a photo of him in a business magazine, taken during a press conference where he was denying all allegations. The slick suit was still there, but the confident smile was gone, replaced by a strained, desperate grimace. His eyes, once so cold and calculating, now held a frantic, cornered look. It was the same look I had seen in my study. And Sarah. I didn't see her directly, but through Silas's discreet network, I learned that her engagement to Mark had been quietly called off. Her architectural firm, once soaring, was losing contracts, clients wary of association with the scandal. Her reputation, meticulously built, was crumbling under the weight of her proximity to Mark's public disgrace. The gifts and loans from Mark, once a source of financial comfort, now implicated her, painting her as a recipient of dirty money. She wasn't facing jail time, not yet, but her ambition, her carefully crafted life in Manhattan, was dissolving before her eyes. The dead man's switch was still active, a permanent deterrent. They knew that any attempt to retaliate, to reach out, to even whisper a threat, would unleash the full, devastating force of the dossier, ending whatever semblance of a future they had left. They were trapped, living under a perpetual cloud of suspicion and financial ruin, their every move watched, their every ambition thwarted. I finally listed the house for sale. It was time to move on, to start a new chapter, albeit a solitary one. I packed up Eleanor's belongings, the photographs, the mementos. Each item was a bittersweet memory, but no longer tainted. I donated the proceeds from the house and my business to the newly established charitable trust, knowing that Eleanor would have approved. Her legacy, untarnished, would live on, helping others rather than funding the greed of a killer. One quiet afternoon, just before the closing on the house, I walked through the empty rooms for the last time. The echoes were gone, replaced by a profound sense of peace. My journey had been long and difficult, marked by loss and betrayal. But I had faced the darkness, I had protected those who deserved it, and I had ensured that justice, however unconventional, was served. I was still an old man, perhaps a little more weary, a little more cynical. But I was also stronger, wiser, and more resolute than ever before. The unassuming contractor, the quiet widower, had revealed the depths of his experience and his unwavering will. As I stepped out of the house for the final time, the autumn sun warm on my face, I looked back at the familiar facade. It was just a house. My home, however, was now within me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free.